Hey everyone, I'm Scott Ross-Molyneux, and today I wanted to talk about setting up your harp for online lessons. The goal of this video is to give you a workable setup so that your teacher will be able to clearly see your hands and your strings while you're playing, and then be able to give you good commentary on those things so that you're learning and you're getting the most out of your online lessons. There are a lot of tech issues that can arise when setting these things up, and I've gone through a troubleshooting process myself setting online lessons up since COVID started, and so I want to help you solve some of those problems so that you don't have to do all that behind the scenes work like I've done. So what we're going to talk about today in this video, number one, is going to be how to frame your harp. So what kind of camera angle do we need that's going to make the harp very clear to your teacher? The second thing that we're going to talk about is microphone placement. The third thing that we're going to talk about is setting good levels on your microphone so that it's not becoming all distorted whenever you play something, especially loud passages. The fourth thing we're going to talk about is in computer settings to make sure that the video and the audio are very clear. And the final thing that we're going to talk about is how to prep your room. So you can see in my room I've got some sound panels on the wall which help dampen the room. We'll talk about some ways that you can do that without having to buy sound panels on Amazon and glue them to your wall. Alright, so let's get right into it. Point number one is framing the harp. When I first started, the intuition was to place the harp in the center of the camera shot. The problem with this is that whenever we're playing the harp leans back on our shoulder, so its position actually changes. The important thing is to actually leave the column of the harp outside of the frame. If you do this, when you lean the harp back, it's more likely that all of the strings will be within the shot, as well as your face. So you want to make sure when you're setting up a camera angle that both your face and the strings are in the camera shot. A couple positions that are really good for the camera is sort of off to the side, almost perpendicular from where you're sitting and where the harp is. So basically where my camera is right now. Another great shot is sort of right in front of you, similar to where your music stand would be. So maybe you can put a small table or something like that behind your music stand that you could set your laptop on or your iPad on if that's what you're using to do online lessons. Okay, let's talk about a couple camera angles that you might want to consider avoiding. One camera angle like this is when there's a window behind the harp. If there's some kind of backlight, especially natural light that is very bright, it'll actually overexpose all of your white strings. And what that means is you're not going to actually be able to see any of the white strings on the harp. So your instructor will only be able to see your C strings and your F strings and your fingers. That's not very helpful for someone like me giving you feedback because I'm not going to be able to see have you placed on the right strings, how's your technique, that sort of thing. A second camera angle that you might want to avoid is one where it's on the other side of the harp. So currently we're on the side of the harp where my head will be on. If you have to set your camera on the other side of the harp, you're going to always be leaning around and leaning back and then leaning around and leaning back, which can actually be fairly stressful on your back. I know for me, I've had back issues before from playing the harp. It's a very big instrument and it leans on your shoulder. So if we can put less strain on your back, that would be better. So I would consider a camera angle on this side of the harp where I can see your face and the strings. And on top of that, don't put a window behind the strings because that's going to make it really hard for someone to see all of the white strings. One final thing about framing for the harp is you have to consider if you have a passage in your piece that has a lot of PDLT, Près de la table, in it, and you're going to be playing low towards the soundboard, you might have to adjust the position of the camera so that it cuts off your forehead. If that's the case, it's okay as long as I can still see your mouth and your eyes, as long as I can also see when your hands go down to play close to the soundboard. Section number 2, let's talk about mic placement. Mic placement is really important. Whenever we're miking a harp for online lessons, the best place to mic it is right in front of the soundboard. So you want to place the mic kind of a little bit lower than your music stand would be, pointing at the strings and the soundboard. The reason this placement is really good is because mics are very directional. They like to hear everything in front of them, and they tend to reject things that are behind them. This is so that they can record what you want them to record and not other sounds like street sounds, motorbikes going by, that kind of thing. This mic placement will pick up both your harp playing and your voice if you're speaking directly towards it. And that's why I really like this mic placement for online lessons. You may notice that there are a couple knobs or dials on your microphone if you don't have a very simple microphone. One of them might be labeled pattern. Pattern means the direction in which the microphone is going to record. I tend to recommend the pattern that looks kind of like an upside down heart shape. That pattern is going to be great for recording everything sort of to the side of the microphone a little bit and in front of it, but nothing behind it. So this gives you a really directional sound, and it's great for recording your voice and the harp because those things are likely coming from the same direction if the microphone is pointing at the soundboard of the harp. So that would be the pattern that I would recommend for you when setting up your microphone. If your microphone doesn't have a dial or a knob for this pattern setting that I'm saying, don't worry about it. Just set up the microphone so that it's pointing at the soundboard of your harp and pointing towards where your voice will be coming from. Number 3 is levels. What does levels mean? Levels means the sensitivity of your microphone. So how sensitive is it to the sounds that it's hearing? In this picture, you can see that there are these little bars that go from -48 all the way up to 0. When we're playing the harp or speaking into the microphone, we tend to want that bar to fill up somewhere in the range of -20 to -6. The loudest things that you play on the harp, so like the quadruple forte passages that you just really have to like use all of your strength to play, or whenever you're, say, really excited with your voice, those should be maxing out around -6. If the bar is going higher than that, like in this photo where it's completely maxed out, you're going to get digital distortion in the sound. So the sound is going to start sounding quite bad, and it's going to hurt your teacher's ears. It's also going to be very unclear what you're playing, so it's going to be hard for your teacher to give you accurate feedback on what you've done. There are 2 ways to adjust this. The best way and the first way to do it is to change it on your microphone itself. So your microphone likely will have something called record level or gain. They're basically the same thing. You want to turn that down until the sound is somewhere between -20 and -6. I like -6 for the loudest stuff that you'll be playing, and just under -20 for maybe the quieter passages or when you're speaking. Again, if your microphone doesn't have the ability to control gain or recording level on the microphone itself, that's totally okay. There's actually a way that we can adjust this level in the software itself. So that brings us to point number 4, which is software. I choose to use Zoom for my lessons. There are a lot of reasons for that, so I'm going to go over the settings that are particular to Zoom itself. There are similar settings within Skype, so look through your Skype settings or other video software and make sure that you can get settings that will do the equivalent to what I'm going to explain to you here. Zoom and voice software is optimized, obviously, for voice. That's what the software is built for. It's built for people having meetings with their company, that sort of thing. Because of that, Zoom has been programmed to hear human voices and not hear musical instruments. So essentially, Zoom is trying to hear a human voice and take all the other sounds, like someone at a job site hammering, or maybe like a steamroller on the street. I had some people doing construction outside my house for the last week, repairing the road. Zoom is going to hear those sounds and say, okay, that is not a human voice. Let's mute that sound, or let's take the volume of that sound down so that whoever's listening to the person speak isn't hearing those distracting sounds that aren't their voice. Because of that, whenever we play like a chord or a scale or a note on the harp, what's going to happen is Zoom is going to say, that's not a voice, let's mute that sound. We want to turn this off so that everything that we play on our harp goes into Zoom and reaches our teacher or reaches our student. It's really important that we go through these settings. If we open up our audio settings in Zoom, we can do that by clicking on this little white upward arrow by the microphone. Note that this won't be available to you if you're using an iPad or a mobile device, which is why I would recommend using some kind of laptop or desktop computer to have online lessons. iPads and phones are possible, but you're not going to be able to attach an external microphone, and you'll have less control over the sound settings within Zoom. So we're going to click on this little white arrow, and we're going to open up audio settings. Within audio settings, you can see a drop-down menu which allows you to select which microphone you want to use. If you've plugged in a microphone to your computer, now's the time to select that microphone that you've plugged in. Underneath this, there is a little bar, which is part gray and part blue. That bar is showing you the levels. So like in the previous photo when I was showing you the levels, again, you don't want this bar to be maxing out. You don't want this bar to be all dark blue. You want at least some gray at the top, even when you play the loudest possible things that you're going to play. If it maxes out, it's going to sound really distorted and your teacher's ears are just going to cry. Be nice to your teacher. Make sure that it's not maxing out. If you want to change it so that it isn't maxing out anymore, you can use the little volume slider right underneath it to adjust the volume. This is where you will adjust the gain for your microphone if your microphone doesn't have a gain knob on it for you to adjust. Gain and volume and record level, they're all kind of terms for the same thing. If we're talking really technically about recording and doing professional recordings or on an amplifier, gain and volume are not the exact same things. But for our purposes, you can consider them the same thing. You want to set that volume level or the gain level or the record level to a place where it's not maxing out the bar. This checkbox here for allowing Zoom to automatically adjust the volume. We really don't want this, and the reason we don't want to check this checkbox off is because if Zoom is automatically adjusting the volume, whenever we play something that's really loud and really full, Zoom is going to take the volume and just bring the volume down, essentially removing your dynamics. And if you play something that's really quiet, Zoom is going to increase the volume. This is great for speaking because if I'm whispering or I'm just speaking quietly in my house, Zoom will adjust the volume so that you can hear me. And then if I start shouting or something like that, it will turn the volume down so that it doesn't break your ears and become really loud. But this is not very good for performance because when you're performing, you want to be able to create dynamics and shape phrases. And we don't want Zoom basically flattening all of that. I've definitely taught some lessons over Zoom where it's like, I can see that my student is working harder, but it doesn't sound like they're playing any louder. So make sure that you can disable this setting as well. Don't check it off. If you're doing just voice calls and you're only going to be talking, maybe it's a music theory lesson, something like that, these settings within Zoom overall are much less important. But if it's a performance lesson, really adhere to these settings. All right, the final settings that we should talk about in Zoom, which are really important, are the advanced settings. So if we click on advanced and go into the advanced settings, you can see my settings in Zoom. So I have disabled the top two options and left the third option as auto. These are the options that allow Zoom to listen to sounds in the room or in the environment and decide if it wants to mute them or not. I'm turning these off because we don't want it to ever think that something isn't a voice and mute it. I also like to check this little checkbox at the top. That allows for this option to come up whenever you're in the gallery view or speaker view for Zoom. When you click this option, it's going to turn blue and the text will change. When the option is blue, it means that all the sound that the microphone is hearing is going straight through to the other person. This is what we want. When it's grayed out like this and it says turn on original sound, that means that Zoom is doing some modifications to the sound. We don't want it to be like this for our lessons. Okay, number 5, the final thing we're going to talk about in this setup video. I know it's been a lot. There's a lot to think about when setting up harp for lessons online. The last thing is how to prepare the room. So you can see in my room that I have these black things on the wall. These black things are basically pieces of foam, soft material that I've stuck to the wall. And what that does is whenever I'm speaking, my sound goes out like ping pong balls and bounces all around the room. It hits the hard surfaces of the walls and then bounces like a little ball. Bouncing sound will also come back into the microphone. And that's what creates the phenomenon of reverb. So you can hear that I'm in a space. It sounds echoey almost. That's because the sound bounces around and then goes back to the microphone. So we want to eliminate as much of that as possible, because this reverb is going to make it sound echoey and unclear, especially if you're in a small room that's square. If you're in a very large room, you might have less problems with this, but I tend to recommend trying to get rid of as much reverb as possible. So one thing you can do is you can buy soundproofing panels and stick them to your wall, but this is very expensive. relatively expensive because you can do it for free. Here's how to do it for free. If you've got some kind of movable carpet and you're on hardwood floor, put carpet in your room. The next thing that you can do is make sure that there's lots of furniture and things that aren't straight. So flat walls, sound likes to reflect off of them. So put like a plant in the corner of the room where there would normally be two straight walls that intersect. You can put furniture in the room, so bring in a couch, something like that. But my personal favorite option is to hang a bunch of sheets or blankets on something in the room. So I've got like a little wall divider, a mobile wall divider that I can take around my house and move around, and I just hang blankets on it. And then another tip is to if you can pull curtains over windows, do that. That's another great way of muting some sound within the room. A final way would be to take pillows off of your couch or your bed or something like that and pile them all up all around the room on any hard surfaces. So if you've got a desk, pile a bunch of pillows on top of it. If there's a wall that's wide open and it's just a flat wall, pile some pillows up against it. All of these things will make noticeable differences in muting the sound quality. So I've actually done that for my setup today. I've got my wall divider over on this side, and it is got some blankets hanging on it. And then I've got my soundproofing on that wall as well as on this wall. And then I've got some other things in the room, like a music stand, which has some soft stuff on it, and my light, which also has an umbrella on it, which is kind of a soft material. And then I have a carpet on the hardwood floor. So those are all the things that I've done to make the sound, the audio in this video a little bit better. So I hope this video was really helpful. There's a lot to go through. These have been the 5 steps. Get a good camera angle, have a good mic placement so that it can hear your voice and the harp. Set your levels properly so they're not maxing out. Get in Zoom settings set up so that Zoom is not controlling the audio in any way. And finally, prepare your room in some way that dampens sound a little bit so that you have crystal clear audio whenever you're sending audio to your teacher. This is a problem-solving process, and you likely won't arrive at a setup that you really like for several lessons. I know I've gone through maybe 8 or 9 different configurations for my online lessons before I've found something that works quite well for me. Give yourself some time and expect some troubleshooting to happen. If you're having any problems with this setup and something is unclear or there's a specific problem that you need to address for your specific space, first consider, can I move furniture around or change the position of where my harp is? Because maybe rotating this harp the other way will make it so that there isn't a window behind it, something like that. So consider changing the position and the setup of the room. If you can't figure it out after that, put a comment in the comments below, and when I see it, I'll try and give my advice as to what the best way to solve it is. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, press the thumbs up button, and if you want to see more content from me, it's going to be both educational content as well as harp content and composition content. If you want to see some of that, subscribe and click the bell button. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.